So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this CME Academia CME scheduled for this Friday evening. This is on the topic of TNF alpha inhibitors in dermatology, and I'm Amit Ajmera, Vice President and Head Vertical 3. This is our beautiful campus at Ahmedabad. Of course, COVID traveling has got reduced. However, I do extend, once the things become normal, our invite to be there at our beautiful campus. And straight away, let me hand it over to Dr. Prateek. But I am very, very thankful to Dr. Sunil Tailiani for moderating the session today. I'm also thankful for Dr. Nalavde to join as a special guest.
Let me
Dr.
interrupt you.
Nagaraja, Dr. Anupama Singh, and Dr. Abdul Matin for the panelists today. So I wish you a very good scientific discussion. And to take this forward, I'll hand it over to Dr. Prateek. Welcome once again.
You have not changed my photograph.
Yeah, that apologize for that. Nirmala, can you move next, please? Yeah. So, good evening, doctors. I am Dr. Pratik. I am looking after dermatology and orthorheumatology medical services on behalf of Cadila. It's my pleasure to introduce all our panelists. Our panel moderator, Dr. Sushil Taliani, sir, who is a consultant dermatologist having a rich experience of more than 35 years in the field of dermatology, and he has been active member of all the national and international dermatological societies, and has been awarded on Dr. B.C. Roy birth anniversary at Economic Times Dr. Conclave, and written several chapters in XC Ideal textbook, and very active in training young enthusiastic dermatology on the laser and different aspects, because he has a special interest in clinical dermatology, lasers and office-based surgeries. Thank you, sir, for accepting the invitation and agreeing for moderating on a very innovative topic. Next, also I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Ajit Nalwade, sir, who is a consultant rheumatologist, and he is associated with one of the renowned institute from joint disorder aspect, like that is Sancheti Institute of Orthopedics at Pune, also associated at Columbia Asia Ruby Hall, has been a principal investigator on various global national clinical trials at Ruby Hall Clinic, and a chairman of research board at Sancheti Hospital, and he has been active member of DSMB phase 2 study, and currently involved in 3 global studies ongoing as a principal investigator. Thank you, sir, for accepting the invite, for being a guest speaker and bringing your value from the rheumatologist point of view to this topic today. We have also with us another senior dermatologist, Dr. Nagaraja sir from Bengaluru. Sir has been a former professor and HOD at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Medical College, has around 9 publications in national and international journals, and has been a member of both national and international dermatological societies, and has been a core committee member in 2000 and National Conference of Dermatologists Venerologists. We welcome you, sir, for and thank you for accepting the invite, Dr. Nagaraja. Also, I would like to introduce our other panelist from Patna, Madam Dr. Anupama Singh, Madam. Madam is currently associated with Patna Medical College and Hospital, where she is working as assistant professor and HOD, head of the department, active member at IIDVL, and has a rich experience of more than 15 years. We welcome you, madam, and thank you for accepting our invite.
Thank you, Dr. Pratik.
Yeah, and also we have in our group a young dermatologist from Pune, Dr. Abdul Matin, and who is associated with different hospitals as a consultant dermatologist, ranging from Medi Express, Satyanand Saraswat, and National Hospital, and Sirona's Heading Center and IBM Pune. We welcome you, Dr. Abdul Matin. With this, I would request our guest speaker, Dr. Ajit Nalwade, sir, to take the session ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Pratik.
I would just request everyone
Nirmala,
other than the speaker to keep the mic on mute. We are getting a lot of disturbance.
Nirmal, can you mute all while the session is going on, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And when's the pen? Yes, sir. Over to you, sir.
So good evening, and with the permission of the chair, may I proceed with my talk? Uh, so today, I'm here to talk for a few minutes about safety of TNF inhibitors in clinical practice. I'll be touching some practical points and concerns we might face when we are to use TNF inhibitors. So let me just a second. So is there a disturbance because my slide? Okay. So let me start with this case. This patient, which I happened to see 1 week ago, this is a 55 years female and with extensive psoriasis since 5 years. She is obese, hypertensive, diabetic, and she has been treated with methotrexate, apremilast, cyclosporine, apart from NSAIDs and glucocorticoids. She has been referred to me for episodic inflammatory back pain, left buttock pain, and heel pain, which she has been experiencing since last 1.5 years. 3 months ago, she also has had an episode of uveitis, which was treated with glucocorticoids. X-ray is suggestive of bulky asymmetric syndesmophytes, and MRI is positive for acute on chronic sacroiliitis. So we have our diagnosis. Patient has psoriatic arthritis with axial arthropathy, which we label as axial psoriatic arthritis. And I have recommended her for adalimumab. Now, why I have recommended her adalimumab or TNF inhibitors, in particular adalimumab, I'll justify in this slide. So my subsequent 10 slides will try to answer these questions. Why TNF inhibitors? Are they safe? And if at all we plan to proceed with TNF inhibitors, how are we supposed to proceed? So cutting the long story short, because we have only 10 to 15 minutes wherein I have to finish this, I am presenting before you this slide by GRAPPA. GRAPPA is the group for research and assessment of psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, which have these recommendations in 2015, which are based on indications. Though the slide appears crowded, I'll try to focus. This here, basically in patients who are presenting with psoriasis, especially extensive plaque psoriasis or other therapies. So almost all therapies approved for psoriasis, that is topical therapies, conventional DMARDs that include methotrexate, leflunomide, cyclosporine A, biologics like TNF inhibitors, IL-12, 23 inhibitors, though these are not available in India, IL-17 inhibitors, apremilast, all of these drugs work on psoriasis. So probably you are better person where you'll decide on TNF inhibitors or other biologics to decide. So patients only having psoriasis. So what I understand is extensive psoriasis, probably more than 20% of body surface area. But patients who present with musculoskeletal symptoms, which we label as psoriatic arthritis, we come into the picture. And the patient which I just presented has axial psoriatic arthritis, and she has never experienced biologics, so she comes here, axial biologic naive psoriatic arthritis. Uh, apart from NSAIDs and physiotherapy, if they don't work, the drug of choice is TNF inhibitors. So that is why I have recommended TNF inhibitors, and why I suggested adalimumab for sake of convenience, especially in this era of COVID, wherein I wouldn't like to give her infliximab. Etanercept, of course, is out of question because patient has had uveitis, which might be flared with etanercept. Just recently, IL-17 inhibitors have also been shown to be effective in axial spondyloarthritis, especially those with extensive skin involvement. IL-12, 23 inhibitors actually are not that effective in axial spondyloarthritis. These again are the most recent EULAR 2019 guidelines. Any patient who presents to us with psoriatic arthritis or a diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis, we usually identify whether they have peripheral arthritis, whether just monoarthritis, enthesitis, or predominantly axial disease. So for those with oligoarthritis or polyarthritis, we prefer conventional disease modifying agents. Almost 30% patients respond to those. Methotrexate is drug of the choice. If not, then leflunomide or sulfasalazine or combination, or even apremilast. That is what we try in them first. But our patient has presented with axial disease, and here if NSAIDs and physical therapy doesn't work, it is biologics. And the usual practice is to start with TNF inhibitors. Even patients with peripheral arthritis and extensive psoriasis who don't respond adequately to conventional disease modifying drugs, we go for biologics, TNF being the usual practice. Nowadays, with extensive skin involvement, IL-17 inhibitors are also preferred. So this was about why I would prefer TNF inhibitors. But once we decide to go ahead with TNF inhibitors, we are really concerned about the risks associated with it. Now, what are the risks? What we know till now, the definite increase in serious infections, tuberculosis, some opportunistic infections, probably neoplasia, lymphoma, some autoimmune phenomenon, demyelinating diseases might worsen. Uh, Congestive heart failure, if patient has, it might worsen, and there are some patients who experience skin reactions. But do they really happen in most of the patients? No, they happen in very small percentage of patients.
Uh, Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Ajit Nalawade.
Yeah.
Your voice is not audible. This audience
Okay.
have written that.
Okay. Is it okay now? Am I?
Yeah, you can increase
It is
the voice.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, once we decide to initiate TNF inhibitors, what we are most concerned about is the risks associated. What I've listed here is some of the known adverse effects, which usually happen in less than 3% of patients. That is serious infections, tuberculosis, opportunistic infections, neoplasia. This is really reassuring that probably it's not TNF inhibitor related, disease related. We'll see in one of the slides, and certain skin reactions. But if we consider the risks associated with psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis, which if not adequately treated, those related with skin disease, reduced quality of life, structural damage to the joints, other extraarticular manifestations like uveitis, deformities, disability, loss of work, loss of earnings, morbidity, mortality, and psychiatric secondary problems, the risks of the disease definitely outweigh the risks of the biologics, and the risks associated with biologics are actually acceptable risks which are going to give us a lot of benefit. So definitely uh, we would like to prefer treating patients with TNF inhibitors or other biologics if patient is uncontrolled on conventional disease modifying drugs. Now this slide I just try to show the observational data from various registries. Uh, Registries because those more correlate with our real life practice. The rabbit registries, the German registry, the British registries, and other cohorts of psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis patients, the adjusted relative risk of serious infective events in patients receiving TNF inhibitors is just 1 to 2 times the patients who are not on TNF inhibitors. So it is not a very alarming risk, and it should be quite acceptable. Uh, but we should definitely consider that serious infections are multifactorial, and it is not only the TNF inhibitors that have to be blamed. The higher disease activity, the higher risk of infections, other drugs like steroids, and comorbidities like diabetes, CKD, uh, other systemic illnesses contribute to the increased risk of infectious events. So pre-screening is very important. And so always consider other conditions while you are recommending TNF inhibitors for patients, whether patient has very high disease activity, whether other comorbidities are there, whether there's high dose steroids being used, and advanced stage. So you can stratify the patient and counsel accordingly. Biologic use definitely has small but significant, that is 1 to 2 times increased risk of serious infections, especially in early 3 to 6 months. That too is contributed by other by use of steroids in some susceptible individuals, and higher doses. So lower doses can be used to counteract the increased infection. Now, the next concern with us is, especially in India, is tuberculosis and other opportunistic infections. The TB risk is definitely increased beyond the increased risk due to inflammatory diseases. Almost the data available shows, especially in low risk population, 4 to 9 times the risk of tuberculosis reactivation might be increased, and up to 30 times increase in the risk of patients with high risk, like those living in endemic areas, those having HIV positive, prisoners, patients living in slums, and history of exposure to tuberculosis. And and other opportunistic infections also are increased to some extent, like hepatitis B, hepatitis C, zoster, herpes simplex, CMV, Epstein-Barr, other fungal infections, and parasites. So we definitely have to screen the patients for all this, and this is what we usually do in our clinical practice. All patients are screened for latent tuberculosis or active tuberculosis based on the history, and if there is no history and examination suggestive of active tuberculosis, latent tuberculosis is to be ruled out by TB interferon gold, Mantoux test, chest X-ray. Apart from this, HIV, hepatitis B, and anti-hepatitis C serology is routinely done. We don't have screening measures for fungal and opportunistic infections where we have to rely on suspicion and signs and symptoms. Also consider empiric antifungals in at-risk patients with undiagnosed systemic illnesses. Now, who are the patients who we should not advise TNF inhibitors, even if we feel that TNF inhibitors are right for this patient? So patients, if they have active hepatitis, patients have non-tuberculous mycobacterial infections, patients if they have invasive fungal infections like aspergillosis, history of intravesicular BCG treatment. The reason is, uh, despite treatment, non-mycobacterial tuberculosis usually are difficult to eradicate. Same with the invasive fungal infections. It is better to avoid TNF inhibitors in these patients. Now, initially, when TNF inhibitors were being used in therapy around the beginning of 20th and 21st century, there was theoretical risk of increased risk of malignancies because it inhibits tumor necrosis factor. But the data has been reassuring, and in fact, whatever incidences of malignancies have been reported with TNF inhibitors, the same incidence is happening with patients with RA who are not on TNF inhibitors. Say like, so though the overall cancer risk is not there, CA lung, non-melanoma skin cancer, lymphoma has been seen to be increasingly reported in patients receiving TNF inhibitors, but this happens also with patients with RA. Melanoma, leukemia possibly increased, but this happens also with RA. Breast and adenocarcinoma of lung, of colon, in fact decreased incidence with patients on TNF, but this is also seen with RA. We really are not sure what is responsible here, whether it is the inflammatory arthritis or TNF inhibitors. Though the recurrence rates of malignancies which have been treated is unchanged, even if patients are receiving TNF inhibitors. So definitely this is reassuring. And this is my final slide. So what is the take home message before initiating TNF inhibitors? Definitely employ screening measures and recurrent patient selection to rule out latent tuberculosis, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV, opportunistic infections, fungal infections, or patients having malignancies, occult malignancies like maybe non-melanoma, melanoma, skin cancers, and lung malignancy. Vaccination, wherever appropriate, has been shown to reduce incidences of infection in these patients, especially the pneumococcal vaccine and influenza vaccine. Live vaccination should be avoided. if you are going to give, or if patient is on TNF inhibitors. But if at all, herpes zoster is recommended in patients more than 50 years of age. If but you cannot start TNF blockers within 2 weeks of giving any live vaccination. Avoid or lower glucocorticoid use, and try to maintain optimal disease control with optimization of therapy to reduce the infectious complications of the therapies. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Nalwade sir, for throwing light on safety of TNF alpha inhibitors in a general practice, in a clinical practice. With this, we will move ahead with our panel discussion, wherein I would request our moderator, Dr. Sushil Taliani sir, to take ahead with this, and we will move as per the panel discussion. Over to you, Dr. Taliani sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pratik, and thanks, Dr. Nalwade, for having set the ball rolling. Now, without wasting any time, because we are here to discuss and we are here to listen to our panelists, I would just request people to just cut off the noise in the background, because I'm sure we all are here to discuss science. Huh? So we all know TNF alpha is a cytokine produced by monocytes and macrophages. It is activated by mast cells, fibroblasts, neurons, glial cells, T cells by a variety of infectious stimuli. At low levels, it's a beneficial thing which augments the host defense mechanism against intracellular pathogens like M. tuberculosis. It also plays a key role in tumor defense. That's where tumor necrosis factor alpha. But at higher level, when it gets deranged and excess is produced, it is involved in recruitment of inflammatory cells and pro-inflammatory cytokines in cutaneous microenvironment. Increased levels are associated with psoriasis severity, both skin and joints. So therefore, it's very important to control the increased levels. So with this, I would like to ask Dr. Nagaraja, Professor Nagaraja, to tell us which molecules fall in the category of TNF alpha inhibitors. Sir, you have to unmute your mic.
Nirmala, can you unmute, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So the other molecules are infliximab, etanercept, rituximab. Hello?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Adalimumab. And so there are so many other newer versions also available now.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the anti-TNF alpha molecules are either monoclonal antibodies, which are infliximab, adalimumab, as Dr. Nagaraja told you. Plus, we have golimumab, which is used by Dr. Nalawade and not used by us because it's certified for use in arthritis and not in skin so far. And we have certolizumab pegol. Pardon me for the spelling mistake there. In addition, there's one molecule which is a TNF alpha receptor fusion protein, that is etanercept. These are the molecules that we have in the category of TNF alpha antagonists. So, Dr. Anupama Singh,
Yes, sir.
how are you doing this evening? I would like
Yes,
you
I'm
to
fine.
tell the audience about the labeled indications for the TNF alpha antagonists. If you can tell us about some labeled indications.
Yes, sir. The label indications of TNF alpha indicators can be categorized into three. One in rheumatologic conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Then in gastroenterology, we use in adults Crohn's disease, in juvenile Crohn's disease, and in ulcerative colitis. And in dermatology, we use for psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis, and even for hidradenitis suppurativa and non-infective uveitis. So these are the labeled indications of TNF alpha inhibitors.
Thank you. So we'll just go through this. We have to realize that the labeled indications are maximum for adalimumab. And the ones with the red circle are the ones which are of more importance for us. We treat psoriasis, plaque psoriasis, we treat psoriatic arthritis, and we treat hidradenitis suppurativa. But in addition, you heard the other indications which Dr. Anupama told us about. We have lesser number of indications for infliximab labeled and etanercept, as the slide shows. Now with this, I would come to the young blood, Dr. Abdul Mateen. You have to tell me about. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
I have to just.
Place and move ahead, sir.
Yeah, so what are the off-label indications? My computer is frozen, sorry for that. So what are the off-label indications in addition to the labeled indications?
Actually, there are many off-label indications. If you want to categorize them, I would categorize them broadly into neutrophilic dermatosis, which would include your Behçet's and your PG, pyoderma gangrenosum. And you would have the other category, which are your autoimmune connective tissue disorders, which is your dermatomyositis and relapsing polychondritis and scleroderma. Although even we can, there are off-label indications for the bullous dermatosis, which is your pemphigoid, pemphigus vulgaris, and cicatricial pemphigoid. And of course, also to include even in hidradenitis suppurativa, in GVHD and SAPHO syndrome, and pityriasis rubra pilaris, and in granulomatous disorders, you would have granuloma annulare disseminated type and sarcoidosis. So these are the broad list. It's a very long list, but these are your off-label indications.
Yeah, sky's the limit. But when we use it off-label, we have to be medically safe.
Yes.
So again, these are the off-label uses of adalimumab, including alopecia areata. People have used it, published articles, pyoderma gangrenosum. And for etanercept, the off-label list is bigger because probably it was an earlier molecule and their label indications are lesser. For example, the HS is labeled for adalimumab, but for etanercept is off-label.
Yes.
It has also been used for vasculitis and is off-label for infliximab. So thank you.
So, and one more thing I would like to point out is that for vasculitis, it was the systemic vasculitis that has been indicated for etanercept.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for chipping in.
Yeah.
So with this, I have to take help of our guest, Dr. Professor Ajit Nalawade. See, we treat a lot of psoriasis. Can you give us some clues about how to diagnose psoriatic arthritis early? Clinically, what are the markers which will tell us let us look for arthritis?
So the basic manifestations which a patient with psoriasis, if presents, points towards psoriatic arthritis, because psoriatic arthritis actually is a clinical diagnosis. Let me tell you a few things. One is dactylitis, wherein patients will have swollen finger and they'll have pain and swelling of the finger. They can have enthesitis, usually the heel pain. These are more subtle features, but patients might have back pain with early morning stiffness, which points towards spondylitis. This, in fact, you should ask to all your psoriasis patients because they won't complain it to you. So it's early morning stiffness and back pain. It's also insidious onset, so patient doesn't have it acutely, so they might not tell anybody. So any patient having inflammatory morning stiffness, you should always consider whether he or she has psoriatic arthritis, axial psoriatic arthritis. And apart from that, other is easy that patient might sometimes present with distal polyarthritis, which you won't miss, or oligoarthritis like knee swelling or any other joint swelling or 2-3 joints which are swollen. So probably that is not easily missed.
Right.
What is missed is back pain with early morning stiffness.
Thank you. So, we see a lot of cases where they say psoriatic arthritis can follow plaque psoriasis by sometimes as late as 10 years after
Yes,
the
of
onset.
course. Yeah, this
But we
happens.
also read that there are cases where you see arthritis preceding the psoriasis on the skin.
Yeah, so these kind of patients usually present to us first. Just 2 days ago, I saw a patient who presented with arthritis of this joint and this joint. So usually asymmetric arthritis affecting only single finger doesn't happen in rheumatoid arthritis. It's distal. It usually happens in psoriatic arthritis, and they present with distal DIP arthritis many times, especially nail disease and DIP arthritis. They probably won't consult dermatologists. So these are patients which we tend to see before extensive psoriasis.
So how confidently can you tell them it is psoriatic arthritis, and do you have any cases where the skin lesions don't develop at all?
See, once we put the patient on methotrexate, skin lesions are not going to develop.
Correct.
And basically the X-ray features are very characteristics of psoriatic arthritis. See, X-ray of hand, especially if DIP arthritis and PIP arthritis also, in psoriatic arthritis, there isn't much of a periarticular osteopenia, which happens with rheumatoid arthritis. And there are proliferative changes in X-rays, like bone spikes you will see. But with rheumatoid arthritis, it is more of erosions. Okay. So X-ray features are very characteristic to diagnose psoriatic arthritis, and we can definitely diagnose it.
So friend, from Dr. Nalavade's statements, you have to realize that we have to clinically suspect psoriatic arthritis in patients, because treatment, severe treatment will be different. You can't treat it with topicals, number one. Number two, we have to take help of the rheumatologists who are always there to help us, and radiography is important in helping in the diagnosis, right?
Yes.
Now, we also ask you, because I take help of my rheumatology friends, but does a rheumatologist also take help of a dermatologist whenever he sees or he or she sees a skin lesion?
Yes, of course. In fact, the thing is, what we see in our practice is a patient for the first time if presents to me with psoriatic arthritis and they have mild psoriasis, say like 2% body surface area or something. And once I initiate methotrexate, it takes time for arthritis to respond, but psoriatic lesions in our practice, in fact, they vanish within weeks, maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So we have recommended them to see our dermatology friends, but patients don't bother to go there. So that is how the dermatologists feel that rheumatologists don't refer patients to dermatologists. Maybe that is one reason.
Because
but extensive psoriasis, definitely one should involve, and we should involve dermatology colleagues.
Thank you. Now, with this, I would like to ask Dr. Nagaraja as to what are the contraindications for using TNF-alpha antagonists? Which are the conditions where you would not use it?
It's not very clear.
What are the contraindications towards the use of TNF-alpha antagonists? Where would you not use?
Okay. Yeah, the contraindications are, one is the patient is immunocompromised. For example, it could be HIV infection. Second thing is patient on corticosteroids for a long time. Now, third thing is any history of lymphomas and leukemias or malignancies. Okay. The fourth one is severe fungal infections, especially systemic infections, pregnancy, and lactation also. Of course, it is actually a point of debate to be discussed about it. But however, I say it should be definitely should. These are the contraindications to be used for using TNF-alpha inhibitors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, as he mentioned, any significant sepsis or infection, which could be chronic as well as localized or systemic, hypersensitivity to active substance or any of the excipients, in case of infliximab with the infusion reactions, moderate to severe heart failure, heart association class 3 or 4,
okay, yes.
Pregnancy and lactation, and then active multiple sclerosis or optic neuritis, malignancy or pre-malignancy states, excluding an adequately treated non-melanoma skin cancer or malignancies diagnosed and treated more than 5 years previously, where the probability of total cure is very high. Dr. Anupama, please tell us,
yes,
what are the screening tests that you would, once you decide to put the patient on TNF-alpha antagonist, what are the tests that you would ask for?
Yes, sir. As we've already discussed that these biologics
Yeah, so
they
just
produce
a
sort of
revision, yeah.
immunocompromised state. So we must do a baseline complete blood count to see if there's any underlying infections. Then the liver profile test, including the transaminases. Even the serum creatinine is done, though it doesn't produce any adverse effect on the renal function. The viral markers are very important, like HBS antigen, anti-HCV, and ELISA for HIV-1 and 2. Then we do tests to detect latent tuberculous infection, which is very important in case of TNF-alpha inhibitors. We do MON2 test, and if facilities are available, then IGRA should be done, which is interferon gamma release assay test. Chest X-ray should be done. ECG and echo, as we just discussed, that we have to rule out congestive heart failure and all. And pregnancy test should also be done. HCG level should be assessed in females.
In a female who's 22 years old, unmarried, in Indian setup, would you ask for a pregnancy test or?
We'll just counsel the patient at least. If she's married, we'll have to have the pregnancy test.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so she's mentioned everything already. And one more thing which sometimes is useful is where you do a screening antinuclear antibody test, because some of the patients develop positive antibodies later on, but some of them might be having positive from the beginning. So medico-legally, you would be safe if you show to the patient that is already positive. Otherwise, you have covered everything. Thanks. Now we come to Dr.
Sir, I just have one question.
Yeah, sure.
That according to literature, they are saying that some physicians, they go for ANA and some don't do the screening for ANA. So
no, because if it becomes positive later on and the patient sues you, that these are cases which have happened in USA.
Okay.
That your drugs cause the aggravation of LE.
Right.
Then you should be able to tell them that this was a test which was positive before the drug was started.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the protocol, Dr. Mateen, for screening for tuberculosis? We heard from Dr. Anupama Singh that you have to screen for tuberculosis, which is very important. We also heard that the chances of reactivation of latent tuberculosis are much higher in people who are on TNF-alpha antagonists. So how do you screen?
So first of all, start with a complete and detailed history of the patient along with physical examination has to be done. And after that, we would go ahead with the X-ray, just if we are doubtful. And a quantiferon test, gold quantiferon or IGRA as discussed. And if all of it is negative, then yes, we can proceed with the therapy. But in response to PPD and MON2 test, there was one article which I read which mentioned that we have to give more amount of tuberculin units in the PPD as compared to the regular tuberculin units being administered. Like instead of giving 1 TU, we can give 10 TU to basically rule out false negative result. So I don't know how much practical that is, but I just went through that article. Other than that, yes, sir.
Yeah, please. So I'll just show you a flow chart here to make it easy. Supposing you have an abnormal chest X-ray suggestive of tuberculosis, past history of tuberculosis, we have to straight away take a pulmonologist's opinion.
Yes.
In a person with a normal X-ray chest and no prior history of tuberculosis, and if the patient is on immunosuppressive drugs before you from the conventional systemic drugs you are shifting, here you cannot do MON2 test because it will be suppressed. So here you have to go for IGRA test straight away, quantiferon TB gold. In a person with a normal X-ray chest and no prior history of tuberculosis, the MON2 test, if it is in a person who has been BCG administered person, less than 15 millimeters is normal. In a person who is not taken BCG, less than 6 millimeters is normal. More than 6, you should do the IGRA test. If it is positive, again refer to pulmonologist. And if you have to give to such people a drug because the patient's skin condition is very bad, then you have to definitely give them chemoprophylaxis with anti-tuberculosis drugs. Here I would like to take Dr. Nalavade's opinion again, because earlier they said isoniazid, then they said rifampicin and isoniazid, and now they're saying again one drug. So what does he do in his practice?
A lot of these recommendations are getting updated. And we are not worried much now as we used to be worried initially. In fact, we used to do HRCT chest also in doubtful patients. But nowadays, in fact, we are doing either MANTU or TB Gold. Those who are at high risk, we advise both. But if it turns out positive, and we definitely have to rule out active tuberculosis. And I generally prefer INH prophylaxis around, it should be at least 6 months, but 9 months is good enough. The reason is that there might be interactions of rifampicin with other drugs which we are using. But still, we can go rifampicin plus INH for at least 4 months.
Before you start?
Not before we start. Actually, the current recommendations are like, if it is latent tuberculosis, you initiate latent TB prophylaxis, and after 2 weeks, you can start TNF inhibitors. But if it's active tuberculosis, you have to treat active tuberculosis and then you have to start it.
Right. But because they say it should be 1 to 2 months of treatment.
Yeah, it was initially. In fact, even in clinical practice, we follow 1 to 2 months. We don't rush. But what now everybody accepts worldwide is that 2 weeks is enough. So after 2 weeks, you can start if disease is very severe and you really want to control the actual disease.
Thanks for updating us. So, but they say that you should do a MANTU test except if patient has been on immunosuppressive drugs, or if patient has got generalized pustular psoriasis, or patient has got erythroderma where you cannot interpret.
So ideally in India, we should do both.
Yeah.
MANTU plus IGRA. Either of that is positive, you consider it as latent TB and you give INH prophylaxis at least.
Thank you. So with this, we come back to Dr. Nagaraja. What are the tests required during monitoring? You started the patient on anti-TNF alpha. Will the patient need some monitoring during the course of treatment? Dr. Nagaraja, please. Good.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. As it's already mentioned, we need to know about the background of tuberculosis. So if there is something which is giving a clue that we need to really investigate about it, go ahead. The routine investigations, which includes a complete hemogram. And if there is anything which is pointing towards the other systemic conditions, which has to be thoroughly investigated before doing it. Chest X-ray is a must, of course, CT scan if it is required.
No, patient has already been on the treatment.
Okay.
During the course, what test would you advise, if at all you do?
During the treatment part?
Yeah.
During the treatment part, monitoring the patient?
Yeah, so what investigations would you ask? A patient has been put on a long-term treatment. Dr.
Okay.
Nalavade wants to save his joint, so he does not want to stop the treatment early. He wants to give it for more than a year.
Okay. No, I'm not
so anyway, we'll share it.
Yeah.
So there should be annual tuberculosis skin test. Alternatives include quantiferon, complete metabolic panel with liver function test for each inflexible infusion, or with any sign of hepatic injury. Otherwise, you do it once in 3 to 6 months on all biological therapies. And hepatitis screen and HIV testing with the risk factors present on all the biological therapies if you feel. And you should repeat the ANA test once in a year.
So ANA once in a year.
Yes. So now with this, I'm sure Dr. Anupama, you can take us through the standard dosing for the skin involvement with at least the first 3 drugs which we have in India. We'll let go of the 4th and 5th. First 3 drugs, if you can tell us about the dose.
Yes, sir. Usually with the adalimumab, which is the most commonly used, we are using 80 milligram stat, and then after we again 40 milligram is given subcutaneously. This is the mode of administration, and then every 2 weeks we are repeating this 40 milligram subcutaneous injection. This is for adalimumab, which is the most common TNF alpha inhibitor being used nowadays. And etanercept was the first TNF alpha inhibitor, which was FDA approved, which is FDA approved. And the dose is variable, like 25 to 50 milligram per week. 25 to 50 milligram per week it is being used. And the third one is infliximab. Yes. Usually infusion, it is given as infusion, 5 milligram per kg body weight is the dose of infliximab. And it can be repeated after some people, they like to repeat if the disease is very severe. Actually, infliximab is given when the disease is very severe because it is associated with severe infusion reaction. So sometimes it is repeated after 2 weeks, or it may be given at the end of 1 month, or sometimes many people are repeating at the end of 2 months.
Yeah,
So
the
dose
standard,
is variable in case.
yeah,
Yes.
wonderful. So standard coach recommendation is that you have induction phase and maintenance phase. Induction phase is 0, 2, and 6 weeks. And all the 3 times you have to give 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight as an intravision in IV infusion. And the maintenance is supposed to be once in 8 weeks, once every 8 weeks. Of course, it can vary. And that's the only drug which is according to body weight. The other two are fixed dose, irrespective of body weight. So what are the merits and demerits, Dr. Abdul Mateen, of TNF-alpha inhibitors? What are the things that you find to be good about it, and what are the risk factors? Dr.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
Dr. Abdul Mateen, I want you to take us through the various advantages and drawbacks of the TNF-alpha inhibitors.
advantages, sir. The best advantages would be that, of course, we would be shifting off the conventional therapy, the old drugs that were used, which were the non-biologic drugs, and the other modes of therapies, conventional mode of therapies. You would go to something new, which would be more promising and which would have a lesser side effect profile with that. And second, and yes, the merits would be a long time remission, that what we would be looking for using these TNF alpha inhibitors. That would be a merit. And yes, of course, to have a steroid sparing effect, like I told previously, and the pediatric age group that is basically should be focused upon. And
yeah, we'll come to it. We'll come to it. Yeah.
So all of that comes under the merits. And for the demerits, of course, since this TNF alpha inhibitors are new, and they are something that has come new in the medical field, although it is etanercept and all has been there from a past
15 years.
Past few years. But the demerits, sir, would be, of course, yes, and reactivation of tuberculosis, and of course, a hypersensitivity to the drug itself. And yes, these are the big demerits according to me at this point. Although, yes, the merits I feel is very good for TNF alpha inhibitors at this point.
Anybody wants to chip in?
So patients who have concomitant ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease can be put on TNF alpha inhibitors, especially adalimumab and infliximab. So that is an advantage. And patients having uveitis, non-infective uveitis, can be put on TNF alpha inhibitors. So that is the merit. And we have vast experience with TNF alpha inhibitors.
And as Dr. Nalawade would agree, unlike the conventional drugs, these are more effective in arresting damage in the cartilage. So you can show much better effect in psoriatic arthritis. And you have a rapid onset of action, which was a difficult thing to achieve. Possibility of more than 90% clearance. Unlike the other biologics, these have been used for a long time. So there's a lot of real world experience that we have. And except for the infliximab, which you said can be used only in rare, difficult cases, this can be administered at home. And you can combine this with topical therapy. You can combine with systemic conventionals. You can combine with the newer molecules like apremilast, and you can combine with phototherapy. So this is how you can achieve a more complete coverage of the disease. And for India, I would think one of the demerits is the cost of therapy. And for infliximab, it will be parenteral route where you to admit the patient. And restrictions on use in pediatric age group, of course, there are exceptions. There are approved labeled indications for use in pediatric, which will come to. And we discussed the theoretical possibility of the side effects. And what's also to be kept in mind is when we keep a patient on the treatment, a patient who's doing well will suddenly stop doing well.
No, stop it. You can't detach yourself to the mobile.
So this is secondary loss of efficacy, which one of the reasons could be the development of neutralizing anti-drug antibodies. And some of the patients in the very beginning will not respond. And some will have an aggravation or they will have psoriasis induced by TNF-alpha antagonists. Uncommon, but you have to keep it in mind.
Paradoxical psoriasis, yeah.
Yes. So what does data say about TNF-alpha inhibitors versus other biologics? Because we have got some other biologics also available in India. So Professor Nagaraj, if you could take us through comparison of this with the other biologics of anybody else.
You would like me to say something?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so we have been dealing with a lot of non-TNF biologics as well nowadays. Earlier part of the last decade, in fact, it was all first choice used to be TNF-alpha inhibitors, and then followed by that other non-TNF biologics, that is what we call. To name a few, rituximab, which is anti-CD20 or anti-B-cell antibody. It's not used in psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis. And there are IL-6 inhibitors, and the more recent ones, that is IL-17 inhibitors, which is secukinumab, which is available in India and is being used for treatment of psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. Then there is IL-12/23 inhibitors called ustekinumab. It is also not available in India, but even that is effective in psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis.
No problem. So we'll thanks.
And there are newer drugs, that is JAK inhibitors, which will be
which are not biologics, which are small molecules.
Targeted treatments. They are also effective. All are efficacious. There's only difference in the side effect profile. TNF inhibitors tend to cause more TB reactivation, while secukinumab probably causes more fungal infections. JAK inhibitors result in more herpes zoster infections. Because otherwise, all are similar profiles.
So we'll just go through some of the published data. As Dr. Anupama told us, if the patients have comorbidities like inflammatory bowel disease, hidradenitis suppurativa or uveitis, the anti-TNF-alpha antagonists will be a more useful molecule compared to the other biologics. Then we have labeled use for use in pediatric age groups. So Dr. Abdul Mateen, I want you to chip in here. Which of the molecules is labeled for use in pediatric age group and which age group?
Basically, etanercept is FDA approved for psoriasis treatment in children 4 years of age and above the age of 4. And there was a study on etanercept, infliximab, and adalimumab in 18 years of age children who these population group was like in 18 years of age group, 18, 16, 17, and it was an RCT study, and they found good results with the use of these agents in psoriasis in this age group.
So
with less adverse effects.
Your US FDA has approved the adalimumab for 4 years to 11 years, and the dose they recommend is 0.8 milligrams per kilogram body weight subcutaneously, each dose not exceeding 40 milligrams. And the European Medical Association has approved the adalimumab. So for etanercept is US FDA approved. Adalimumab is approved by European Medical Association for 4 years and above, and not by American US FDA. So there's some play of, the Europeans approve the etanercept from 6 years onwards, Americans approve from 4 years onwards, and Europeans approve the adalimumab, and Americans have so far not approved for psoriasis.
Yes.
And when did they use it for some arthropathies, they approve from the age of 2 years onwards, about which Dr. Nalavade could tell us something.
And sir, what was the question?
When you have some types of arthritis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, they have approved these molecules from the age of 2 years onwards.
2 years.
Yeah. So we have been using etanercept and more recently adalimumab. Apart from even infliximab in teenagers, but Other biologics like, tocilizumab is also used in GIS, systemic variety of GIA, which is now become more famous because of COVID-19.
Correct. So
but we have used it in very younger patients.
Yeah, so because of positive time, we'll restrict ourselves to the TNF-alpha antagonist, if you don't mind. The real world experience is more with the TNF-alpha because they were introduced earlier, so there's more experience and there's a lot of registries like Dr. Nalwadi told us about. And they said that certolizumab does not cross the placenta. So therefore, there's a reason to use it in very bad psoriasis cases during pregnancy. Others are category B, still they're not used because if it crosses the placenta, it might have something to do with the development of immune system in the fetus. And if you give it towards the delivery, then the fetus baby may be born with immunosuppression for the first few weeks. And that will go on for 4 times the half-life of each drug.
IBD-HS UVEITIS.
Now, Dr. Anupama, could you tell us about adalimumab versus other TNF-alpha inhibitors? You told us that it's subcutaneous, most commonly used.
Yes.
Could you tell us something more?
Yes, as we already discussed that it can be used, means its efficacy is much more in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And this property it shares with infliximab, but with etanercept, it is not effective in GI problems like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And even certolizumab and golimumab. Certolizumab is being used, but it is much more commonly being used in arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis. And the availability also, I think adalimumab is much more easily available nowadays as compared to infliximab. It is very difficult to procure. We were trying for one patient, but it is not easily available. And infusion reactions and are also more common with infliximab, and reactions at the site of injection is more common with etanercept as compared to adalimumab. So these are the advantages. Plus, we have been using adalimumab in type 2 reactions in Hansen's disease and even in reactive arthritis, and it has given very good results.
Interesting,
Especially
very interesting.
Especially in reactive arthritis, sir.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, it is supposed to be 2 years ago, the parent company, the innovators brand, AbbVie, in USA, throughout the world, they sold adalimumab, that is sold as Humira by them, to the extent of $14 billion in 1 year. So why do you think we have biosimilars in India? So we are happy to have more affordable brands here. And $14 billion is to be kept in mind because in that year, India's total expense on the Medicare, private and government together, for the entire country of India was $15 billion. And one molecule sold $14 billion. You can imagine the volume. So could you tell us, Dr. Matin, about what is primary failure versus secondary failure or loss of efficacy? Anybody else?
So actually primary, so can I?
Yeah, please.
Primary failure is that when we are using adalimumab for the first time and we do not get the adequate response, the minimal response which we expect usually. And this can be due to various reasons. It can be due to inadequate dose. The body weight is quite high, so maybe we have to use higher dose. Or maybe we have to use some adjunctive treatment to improve the response. Or in some subgroup of patients, the pathogenetic is so different that maybe TNF-alpha is not the main pathomechanism. So it may not be effective at all. And other biologics may be more effective in those patients.
And secondary failure we discussed and loss of efficacy we discussed.
Yes,
so in a case of primary failure with say one molecule, etanercept, would you give this patient adalimumab as a next molecule because the patient's psoriasis is very bad? Or would you use a different group?
It's better
I would like to use a different group.
It's better to go for a different group.
Very correct. And what about secondary failure? Again, will you go to a different group?
Yeah, initially they are responsive, but later they become failure for the treatment.
Thank you. So primary failure is, as a rule, if it does not work, it will no other TNF alpha antagonist is likely to work. So you have to avoid TNF alpha antagonist. But whereas secondary failure is due to antibodies which are specific for the molecule, and you can work for the other TNF alpha antagonist and it will work. So that's the difference between choosing an alternative drug in primary versus secondary failure.
Sir, just one question I have is the biosimilar part. The biosimilars, there has been some comments on it that biosimilars sometimes cannot be as efficacious as the current molecule, as the original molecule. So, how far has that been true, sir, in your experience? Have you seen that biosimilars are not very efficacious as compared to the biologics?
I have not compared the adalimumab original with the biosimilar because original is not available in India. The innovator brand is not available. But the approval for biosimilars in Europe and USA is a molecule which structurally matches and which has same amount of impurities
same efficacy.
And which has been tried in phase 3 trials and found to be equally efficacious. Whereas in India, this last part has been waived by the Indian FDA, and Indian companies have not done phase 3 trials. As a corollary, they have been told you don't do phase 3 trials, but if there is an untoward incidence to any patient with this molecule, then you will look after the patient and you will handle and look into the scene, and financially you will manage that patient. That has been the corollary to them. Yes, Dr. Nagaraja, you were saying something?
That's the same thing, sir. Same thing.
In fact, I wanted to chip in. I was part of many trials wherein Humira has been compared with local biosimilars, and whatever. In fact, adalimumab as well as etanercept made by Reliance and other companies. But in fact, what I've noted in that study is efficacy usually is not a problem. All the patients respond. There is usually some difference in the side effect profile. If the quality of the product is not good, patients might experience more skin reactions and something like that. But efficacy wise, almost even biosimilars and biooriginators both are quite effective.
And the amount of protein moiety which is added to this should not be more, otherwise there's a high risk of developing neutralizing anti-drug antibodies in future.
Yes.
So there's a secondary loss of efficacy sometimes. So more studies are needed, but you have to have your own experience.
Yeah.
So we did discuss the status in pediatric age group. So as we mentioned, the etanercept and adalimumab are both approved by different authorities. And for pediatric age group, the dose is 0.8 milligrams per kilogram given once a week. Or for adalimumab, it is 0.7 and then every 2 weeks thereafter, not exceeding 40 milligrams. In etanercept, the dose should not exceed 50 milligrams per week. What about pregnancy and lactation? It's a category B. That's what they mentioned. So it should be safe. Would you use it for pregnancy and lactation?
It's an individual choice, but it is better to avoid as much as possible.
Correct.
Yeah, please carry on.
Absolutely. We should not leave any ambiguity there, except as we said, in case of certolizumab, they say it does not cross the placenta. So it may be one option for pregnant women. For lactation, we can be a little lax if the patient's situation is very bad, because a little amount of drug that comes in the breast milk would get destroyed by the gastric juice acid, and it would get broken down into monopeptides from polypeptides before it is absorbed. So very little amount has a chance of getting absorbed. But if you want to be medically safe, you should avoid in lactation also.
In rheumatology, sir, we face this situation quite often. And in fact, it is very reassuring that recently these TNF alpha inhibitors have been graded in grade B. What happens is many times if the disease is very active, we really have to outweigh benefits and risks. And many times we have to consider biologics. But what is important is we can use it in first and second trimester. We should not use it in third trimester.
Very important.
Not beyond 16 weeks.
Only certolizumab can be used, but which is not available in India. No
Because
other biologics are used in pregnancy.
Correct, because in third trimester, transplacental transfer is very easy. So more of the drug goes into baby, and the baby may be born with a drug which has caused immunosuppression. And then your immunizations and everything will get affected. Risk of infections will be more. So this we discussed. What about vaccinations and TNF-alpha inhibitors? Because many of these, now you said you use in pediatric age group. What about vaccinations?
Vaccinations ideally should be given before initiating TNF-alpha inhibitors to get good response. Otherwise, the responses are blunted. But anyways, if what is important is we have to treat the disease first, and we don't have the time. So we initiate TNF inhibitors. Later on, if at all, whatever worth, we can vaccinate at least pneumococcus and influenza vaccines. But ideally, it should be before initiating therapy with TNF.
Yes, I want the other panelists to chip in. Yes, please.
Sir, how many weeks before?
So they said that your vaccination should be over at least 4 weeks before the initiation of therapy. In theoretically ideal situation, if you can wait. And if you cannot, then along with the biologics, you can use the inactivated vaccines, though the efficacy will be affected to some extent. And the big challenge is you should avoid all the live and attenuated vaccines while the treatment is on. So if you have to give these after you stop the treatment, how long do you wait?
You have to wait for another 6 to 8 weeks.
Anybody else?
I think 1 month is
1 month. Yes.
They say minimum 6 months. Minimum 6 months for live attenuated vaccines before you give it. Some people go to the extent of waiting for 1 year, but 6 months is a minimum.
Okay.
Now, would you combine this with conventional antipsoriatic drugs? In which situations and which drug would you prefer? Who would take this up, please?
So I would like to answer that.
Yeah, please.
We usually combine adalimumab with methotrexate, especially with methotrexate, because it helps in preventing secondary failure, as theoretically it has been mentioned, and we see better response with adalimumab and methotrexate. The most common drug that we are using with adalimumab is methotrexate, but it can be combined with other systemic treatment like narrowband UVB and all also.
So when you combine the two, as you said rightly, we don't allow the neutralizing anti-drug antibodies to develop. So
Yes,
there's
sir.
no secondary loss of, reduced risk of secondary loss of efficacy. Plus you cause a more complete coverage much earlier with a lower dose. Having
Yes, sir.
said that, what is the safety of two drugs which cause immunosuppression in the long term? How long would you give the combination? How would you phase out?
So actually, since the patients are not very well off, many a times they take half the dose of adalimumab or biologics that we usually recommend. So usually maintenance has to be done with conventional treatment many a times. Like 6 to 8 injections they take, and then later on we have to maintain them on methotrexate. But the disease control is much better with only methotrexate as compared to when we are not given the biologic.
And more cost effective.
Yes, sir.
So it is when your patient is already on methotrexate and not doing well, and therefore you introduce biologic.
Yes, sir.
In that case, you may have to think of withdrawing the methotrexate earlier because it was not working well once the patient has started improving. And in case you are combining the two to cut the cost from the very beginning, and then you said very rightly, we should try and withdraw the biologic first and continue the methotrexate. So these are two different scenarios. Anybody has anything else to say? Though there are other drugs which have also been used, including cyclosporin, but they say combination should be used for a short duration, because in the long term, two immunosuppressors together, how safe they are, nobody's done any studies. Anybody has a different opinion, please?
So what do we do in
rheumatology-
case if we have two different molecules, like we are shifting from one class of molecule to another, and we are going on with the conventional drugs also, like methotrexate? Do we have to updose, or
No,
what
no,
do we have to? Yes.
no. Which
So-
two molecules are you talking about?
Like if we have, if we are on TNF alpha inhibitors, but then we got a paradoxical reaction. So we are planning to shift, we are planning to start the patient on some other group, like maybe JAK inhibitors or so, and we are giving also methotrexate. So do we, is there any protocol or anything that has to be followed
So
or
on
guidelines?
paper, if the patient is not in a very
Yes, sir.
bad shape and psoriasis
Yes,
does
sir.
not immediate thing, you should wait for 4 half-lives of the drug that you have been drawing,
Okay.
then introduce the next drug. But if during that period of 4 half-lives, which for adalimumab would have been about
Yeah,
2 months.
2 months.
Yes, 4 half-lives of adalimumab will be 2 months. So if you cannot wait for 2 months because the patient is worsening, then you have to give it earlier and monitor the patient more closely.
Okay.
So we said the combination, we have discussed this, so we don't have to show people such a crowded slide again. Will you combine with other biologics? Will you be adventurous enough in a very severe case?
No.
Anybody?
So it can be combined with cyclists, other biologics. Okay,
Yes.
it can be. It can be.
So
But
you should try and
you should
avoid,
avoid.
but there are studies to show that 2 different groups of biologics can be combined initially, provided you monitor the patient very closely, and there are papers to show the effect of combination in resistant cases, recalcitrant cases. But you can't be combining 2 TNF alpha antagonists. You can use one interleukin 12-23 and one TNF alpha, or TNF alpha with interleukin 17A. There are papers on that. So these are some of the papers. So when the patient does not respond, so it is only selected cases. I think in such cases we should institutionalize the patient, admit the patient, and then do something, and not be very adventurous. And how many of the patients can afford when the Indian insurance company does not even cover it? So dosing we have discussed. We have discussed the dosing in children. So only thing about the dosing is, as I told you, the dose is according to body weight in patients with patients who are on infliximab. The other 2 are fixed doses. So when the fixed dose is given, many times they say etanercept should be used 50 milligrams twice a week for the first 3 months. Then you should make it once a week. And in patients who are obese, I have read 2 papers because one of my patients was on adalimumab, he did not respond well, and he was 130 kilos. So there were 2 papers that in such cases, either you can increase the dose to 160 milligrams, and then you can follow it with 80 milligrams every 15 days, or you could give it every week instead of every 2 weeks, maintenance dose, 40 milligrams. So I thought I'll just share with you. These are papers on people who are overweight. So they would not do as well as a person with ideal weight. Dr. Nalavade, I have to ask you one thing. You said when you put methotrexate, patient's skin improves first and then the joints. But when it comes to biologics, it is usually the joint symptoms that clear first and with a lower dose and not the skin.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
So because TNF alpha is the culprit in the joints more often. In fact, it is the IL-17 inhibitors that have better effect on skin if you compare it with TNF alpha inhibitors, if it's only skin.
And joints respond very fast with a lower dose.
Because of TNF inhibitors. In fact, the dose which we use in musculoskeletal disease is almost half what you are using.
So this is a great value addition, your presence in this meeting, because we are getting some very clear messages. Thank you. And when you use the drug adalimumab in hidradenitis suppurativa, the dose is very crazy. You are supposed to use 160 milligrams on day 1. You are supposed to give 80 milligrams 2 weeks later, and then you are supposed to give 40 milligrams every week. So that increases the cost significantly. Yeah. So it is notoriously difficult to treat, and this is the only US FDA approved biologic for moderate to severe HS cases. But as we mentioned, the dose is 160 milligrams on day 1. After 2 weeks, you have to use 80 milligrams, and then after that, every week 40 milligrams. Now, if the patient has done well, how long would you continue the drug? Dr. Abdul Mateen, we want two opinions. If somebody wants to stop it early and somebody wants to continue, and why? You have to tell me.
The biggest factor over here, sir, would be the patient's financial background.
Patient is affording.
Affording or not. Because,
affording patient. I'm telling you, my patient is affording. How long would you continue?
I would first, during the continuation of the therapy, we would of course keep looking at, have a baseline lab checking done. And we would just...
For all that, how long would you give the drug? I just want, how long would you continue?
As of such, 1 year. Till the clearance of the lesions, and then once the lesions are cleared, then yes, we can shift on to the conventional therapy.
But sir, some of them have PASI 75. They will stop at PASI 75. Some will stop at PASI 90. 10% lesions will remain. What would you do next?
Up to 40 weeks, it can be used up to 40 weeks.
Yes.
So we'll come to the rheumatologist at the end because he uses a joint which has to be saved. We can shift to some other, as the lesions start, we can use some other molecules. We have limited choice. So anyway, anybody in dermatology, any dermatologist, Dr. Anupama, Dr. Nagaraja,
yes,
in your patient, how long have you used?
So not more than 1 year.
No, some of my patients have taken for 2 years if they are happy, if they feel that their quality of life is good. But there is a theoretical chance that if you're using for a longer time, you increase the risk of developing neutralizing anti-drug antibodies.
Yes,
So therefore, they say if the patient is in remission, but it's very difficult to define what is remission, and the patient does not have a joint involvement, you may withdraw the drug. So will the rheumatologist stop after the patient is improved?
Okay.
Dr. Nalwade,
So,
what would you
yeah.
do in your patients?
So if we all know that these are non-curable diseases, okay?
Correct.
So if my patient is affording, if he is tolerating therapy very well, and if he has been asymptomatic for a year and without any inflammatory markers on anything, then I will try to taper it off, not withdraw. The duration we tend to increase. Say like if he's taking every 15 days, then we'll make it every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks. This is what science says. In fact, in the West, they used to continue it indefinitely unless some patients started developing recurrence. But because it is now turning out to be very expensive, the recommendations are coming that at least 1 year low activity or remission, then you try to increase the interval. But if patient is affording and disease is responding, I'll continue the same treatment as long as possible.
Thank you.
So even with TNF alpha inhibitors, as long as possible.
Of course, patients are taking it for more than 10 years now.
Yeah, patients have a joint which needs to be repaired and patient is happy walking normally, taking part in sporting activities. You have a golf player who is on TNF alpha antagonist for 10 years now, and he is in the top 10 in the world. So for him, his joints matter. So you have to monitor well. Okay. Now, safety issues. We have mentioned this, so we mentioned Dr. Nalwade has covered this very well. So let's not repeat. So when would you stop? One is when you feel the patient cannot afford. Second is when the patient has reached the stage of remission, which is 75% improvement in some people, PASI 75. So when the patient during the course of treatment develops an acute infection, you have to withdraw it. Patient gets pregnant, you have to withdraw it. Or patient is planning pregnancy. Patient is planning a major surgical intervention 7 days prior to the elective surgery, you should stop it. Immunizations. As the treatment goal is reached. What is the treatment goal? That is what we were discussing earlier. So treatment goal is a very dicey thing. But you have to reach sometimes a stage where you say patient is in remission and markers are all negative and you have to try and stop and monitor the patient. If the patient starts worsening again, you have to offer them. But patients who have been given the drug intermittently because they cannot afford after they recover, you give the drug again, will it work equally well or will it lose its efficacy? In rheumatology, Dr. Nalwade, when you use it again after a gap, does it work equally well or sometimes you feel it's not
working? Many times it works. See, the anti-drug antibodies are only formed in around 2 to 20% of patients receiving adalimumab. Etanercept, it is very less. In fact, anti-drug antibodies are around 3% of patients. So, more than 80% patients should respond again.
Yes, very good. So only the infliximab has a very high incidence of anti-drug antibodies. Infliximab has.
40%.
So now let us end with when a patient is on TNF alpha inhibitors and it is COVID era. What do you do? And then I'll show the recommendations of various bodies.
So should I start or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the current recommendations and the consensus is that if patient is on TNF alpha inhibitors, his disease is well controlled and he or she doesn't have COVID symptoms or exposure, one should continue treatment as it is. Unless he is exposed or develops symptoms, when we stop for 2 weeks or whatever till the patient recovers.
I'll just like to interrupt you. You are in Pune, I'm in Mumbai. We have very high number of cases. So what is if the patient is moving out of the house, there's a risk of exposure.
Yeah. So definite exposure.
Ask me. So either we tell them to be home quarantined, and if they move out, would you continue? Patient is not a healthcare provider. Patient is just going for work.
So what I will follow in my clinical practice, maybe not what recommendations say. I may be more cautious. If patient is skeptical, I'll definitely tell them to stop, continue conventional drugs. But some might even argue with that. I won't. So what is happening? In fact, they are not asking us also. They are stopping even methotrexate and they are coming with flare. So in fact, I am having to restart with addition of steroids.
Which is very sad.
Which is sad. So it is better to maintain remission on the drugs unless they develop symptoms of COVID.
Thank you. Dr. Nagaraja, Dr. Anupama, Dr. Abdul Mateen. I want all of you to chip in one sentence.
Yes, I agree.
You do in your practice.
Yes, sir. We are continuing with TNF alpha inhibitors in our patients, even in this COVID era.
Dr. Nagaraja?
Yes, I would like to continue giving the proper instructions to the patient about the COVID-19 situation.
Dr. Abdul Mateen, now you...
I would also go ahead considering the risk to benefit ratio, because for the patient it might be debilitating also, considering the arthritis and the extensive skin lesions. So yes, I would go ahead.
So there are a few points that we should remember. See, whenever we use biologics, the most common side effect is upper respiratory tract infection and nasopharyngitis, which is what you get in COVID also. So that's a big confusion when you start a patient and patient develops these symptoms. But it has been observed that biologic treated groups compared to the control groups did not have increased risk of COVID-19 infection. And I'll just go take you through International Psoriasis Council recommendations. They say patients treated for psoriasis with any biologics, if the patient is COVID-19 infected, if it is mild or severe, just stop the treatment. If the patient is high risk, like a healthcare provider, and there are no COVID symptoms, or patient has been on COVID symptoms and mild COVID symptoms, it depends on the situation. What is the situation? Look at the high risk. Anybody who's more than 60, anybody with comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hepatitis B, COPD, chronic kidney disease, cancer, you stop it. Others you can continue, but if the symptoms worsen or high fever develops, then you discontinue. This is the International Psoriasis Council. So this should be known so that we are medically safe and we have clear guidelines. We do what the world does. Coming to the American Academy of Dermatology, subjects for recommendation are those treated with psoriasis with any biologic. Patients with high risk and no symptoms, depends on situation. That means you have to look at patient's age, comorbidities in which they have added severe hypertension, liver disease, and current smokers. All these are high risk according to them. Then you decide to stop, and there are no symptoms, continue. If infected, you discontinue, or if you want to start the first time, postpone and change to alternative agent, which should not be immunosuppressive. So what are the two drugs that they recommend? Either we should use acitretin, but in the woman, if acitretin cannot be used, think of apremilast, they say that's relatively safe. Or phototherapy. International League of Dermatological Societies. If there is no COVID symptom, continue. in a high risk but no COVID symptoms, look at the situation. They look at elderly, people with comorbidities, cancer except for keratinocyte, carcinoma. If there's a squamous cell carcinoma which is treated, you don't bother. Internal organ cancers or melanomas, you bother. And if there are symptoms, change to alternative drugs. In infected, discontinue. If you want to start, postpone. In all these cases, don't start in the COVID times. Postpone. Of course, this is for skin. For rheumatological indications, we'll have to hear Dr. Nalavade. If the patient has to be started the first time for a joint damage, in this time, what do you start? In a patient who's 60 plus, 65 years old.
65, usually methotrexate, that is the first thing we start. Even if patient is indicated for biologics, we consider TNF inhibitor. It's not the reason is there is some evidence that preemptive TNF inhibitors results in less cytokine storm issues, because now what we are understanding is that there's problem with the adaptive immunity, T cell activation and all those things, then which overwhelms and results in cytokine storms. As you all know, they are using IL-6 inhibitors for treating that. So so it's all about risk benefit ratio. If patient responds to conventional disease modifying drugs, well and good.
So I fully agree with him. So he has given you a very important point. The biologics only block certain cytokines or certain receptors of cytokines in the process of inflammation in psoriasis, whereas the other conventional drugs which are immunosuppressive cause a diffuse immunosuppression. Therefore, those are more risky. Biologics are slightly less risky. That's why they give you some leeway there. That people with mild symptoms, if the patient is young, you may still continue. Only when the symptoms worsen, you stop it. So this is how biologics are on paper safer. But if I had to use something else in dermatology, I would have used acetretin or phototherapy. For joints, it will not work well, so you have no choice. But when you use methotrexate, you are again causing immunosuppression, sir. So with that, I thought I'll just bring some more color after such a theoretical discussion. So with this, I would like to end the panel discussion, and I would like to thank all my panelists for having contributed very well, and they made it very useful for the audience, I'm sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Doctor. Yes. Now we hand it over to the Cadila group.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Good evening. Once again, this is Lakshmi Narayan introducing myself. I'm a General Manager in Cadila Pharma. Doctor, today is a wonderful evening, and total audience participants more than 120 plus participants, and with excellent topic, TNF alpha inhibitors in dermatology. Doctor, your knowledge has been shared with all the audience, and it has reached to all the 120 doctors. A special vote of thanks, Dr. Sushil Tahiliani. Despite your busy schedule, you have accepted our request to be panel moderator today. That's wonderful, and we are really proud of it that you being a presence in this program. A special guest, Dr. Ajit Nalavade sir, you being a rheumatologist, this evening you made a different perspective of to understand in biologicals and biologics in dermatology. And a special thanks to Dr. Nagaraja, Anupama Singh, and Dr. Abdul Mateen as a panelist for today's program, and made a wonderful sharing of your knowledge. Thanks for all the doctors who have participated and made this program successful. And I thank my Vice President, Mr. Amit Ajmera, and our President, Mr. O.P. Singh, has encouraged us to conduct this kind of webinars. I thank Dr. Pratik, who has coordinated all medical fraternity. I thank my marketing manager, Mr. Deepak Pataskar, and his team, Pratik and Nirmalya. I thank you all my field team, field managers, and field officers for making the doctors to participate in this program and supporting all the. Thank you.
Lakshmi, Dr. Anupama wants to say something.
Yeah, doctor.
No, I just want to thank everyone. It was a very nice program.
Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Anupama, for chipping in so
Thank you,
well.
sir.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, doctor.
Thank you,
Dr.
Tawali
Pratik, would like to
sir and Nalavadi sir and all our panelists. It was a very, very detailed discussion on TNF alpha inhibitors, and I'm sure it would be useful to all the audience. Thank you, sir.
And I would like to especially thank Dr. Nalavade because he gave us a different perspectives, which made the discussion more complete.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Definitely.
It was a pleasure.
Sir, we have picked up this idea, and we are going to be doing this across the country, engaging our rheumatologists and dermatologists so that the confidence building happens around TNF alpha inhibitors.
So
Yes, sir.
we have a better vision of how to manage. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all the doctors. Thank you, Dr. Nalwade. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagaraj. Thank you, Dr. Anupama.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, Dr. Abdul Matin, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.